Hi, everybody. This is Eddie White again from the English Language Testing Society, just continuing with our list of our set of monthly webinars about assessment literacy. And today we're going to be talking about assessment and the CFR. So let me get into screen share mode here again, and I will get going with my slideshow. It's good to see we have some participants from different places around the U.S. and also from Europe, from South America, and so it's great to meet and get connected with people and I guess learn from each other also. So um, this is the last webinar for this year, and just saying a thank you to our good friends at ITAP for sponsoring this webinar. And we're going to be, yeah, I mean, generally the webinars have this focus about assessment literacy and just assessment literacy development and just learning about good practices and standards related to assessment, whether it's at the classroom level or with large scale language testing. So today we're talking about assessment and the CFR. Just a word about I guess the pronunciation of the acronym, because here is in the context here in the U.S., I'm hearing it referring to it as CEFR, and then I went to Europe a while ago and a couple of years ago, and they were calling it CEFR there. So, Tom, maybe just a quick question for you, Tom. What is what is the pronunciation where you are there in Europe? Are you calling it CEFR or CEFR or something else?
They're really calling it CEFR, and then they're very often spelling it out
Yeah,
CEFR.
yeah. And
That's
when I was there, I heard people use the acronym just CFR. So that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with CFR. For me, I guess I've been as the assessment coordinator, which I was doing at the English Center. I've been from 2011 up until earlier this year or last year, I forget. We've been using the CFR for some different purposes, and I'll talk about a little bit about those later. And I guess I want to get your input too about how you're using the CFR in your context, or what possibilities you see it for you, so we can discuss some of those things. And maybe in the beginning I'll just present you with a little bit of information, and then we can discuss some things related to the CFR. This is just a a a quote about it and just a definition of it, I guess, and this middle part here. But it was created to provide this common basis for the elaboration of language syllabuses, curriculum guidelines, exams, textbooks, etc., across Europe. Okay, and you're familiar to some degree with some of I mean, just the different levels. And this is actually a screenshot I did from, I was looking at an earlier slideshow I did actually for teacher training about the CFR, and just the different levels that are involved. Just a reminder, just seeing it now too, that, I think you know also that within each band, sometimes there can be quite a broad range even within the band, and so that's something that we can talk a little bit about later. Sometimes programs use something similar like this. You get from starter all the way up to professional, and just different levels that are based on the CFR. The most common uh, I guess the most common visual, the most common thing associated with the CFR is the global scale, which you've probably I'm sure are familiar with, and here's one of the just visualizations that I've seen of it, which um, we've used before. So just the CFR it's a worldwide industry standard language framework to describe language proficiency. And there are other ones around. In Canada, where I'm from, they use the Canadian language benchmarks, and you have actual scales and other different ones around. But it seems like the CFR is the one that is most widely recognized, I mean, around the world in different places. Some places, I guess, more so than others. I think in the US, it's a I think, a little bit less used and recognized. Okay, it's the most common and important commercial English proficiency tests are all aligned to it. So usually we always get the major language tests aligned to the CFR, and even in our context. Myself and Tani, we've been doing some work about developing a proficiency tests. But even at the English Center or at the university, people would ask us, well, your proficiency test, what is it? What is it? What is it related to? For example, a TOEFL score or an IELTS score? And we would say, well, forgetting about the other tests, we like to make the connection to the CFR. Everything gets connected to the CFR in one way or another with proficiency tests. So. And the CFR is also used in language programs in schools as a basis for decision making, and sometimes about program levels and about placement. Okay, so I guess what I'm saying, I mean, you can be using it more at a programmatic level, for helping design courses and levels within the program, and then of course it's also used very much in assessment wise, at least with it's also used very much with large scale proficiency testing. Okay. And just a closer snapshot of one part of the global scale, and you see that it's that global scale is primarily made up of these can-do statements, and usually they're related to the language production, what the language user can produce, or their receptive skills, what they're able to understand. And I just take a snapshot here, just that in terms of university IEPs, which is one that I guess I'm most familiar with, and lots of universities will have this B1 or B2. I guess is quite a common gatekeeping level in terms of admitting university students into into universities. So I sent, if you had a chance to look, I sent out an article. Usually what I do when I have a webinar, usually I connect it to an article or something particular to read. So this was putting the Common European Framework of Reference to good use. And you guys read that last night while you were having your baths or maybe your morning workouts or something this morning. This is from Brian North, and one of the reasons why I chose it, and I was interested to take another look at it. Brian is one of the co-authors of the CFR, and he also is the developer of the descriptor scales there. Okay. And just a little bit of information what he says from his article. The CFR was published in 2001, consisting of descriptive scheme, common reference points expressed as 6 proficiency levels, descriptor scales for many aspects of that descriptive scheme, advice on curriculum scenarios, and considerations for reflection. So, and if you have a copy of that original, well, it's a book. I mean, it's a couple of 100 pages. There's so much information contained in that. And he says that the aim of the CFR is just to stimulate reflection on current practice, provide common reference levels to facilitate communication. And I guess that is one of the key things about the CFR. And if you talk, you go to conferences or you talk to people from other parts of the world or other places, and you start talking about A2 proficiency levels or B1 proficiency levels, I mean, quite often people know exactly what you're talking about. But if you start talking about, level 9 or level 4 or whatever, then of course that gets, it's much less clear what you are referring to. And just one more little bit of information from Brian. He says that the descriptors can be useful for these things, for the specifications of the content of tests. So you can help specify what should be in tests, what is assessed, stating the criteria to determine the attainment of objectives, how performance is interpreted, and also this key point about describing levels of proficiency in existing tests. So just being able to make some comparisons. Okay, if you've shown up to my webinars before, you probably think Eddie's going to throw in a quiz along the way somewhere. And here it is right here. Okay, so here's a quiz for you, just a little bit about the CFR, about that reading if you did it. So here's the question for you. How many statements are false which ones and why? I'm going to show you 8 here, and you're going to take a look and see if you can answer this question. So how many statements are false, which ones, and why? CFR descriptors and levels have not been formally validated. Language teachers and learners interpret the CFR descriptors consistently across context, regions, and target language. I see I forgot my comma there after context. Okay. Prime function of the CFR is to get all test reporting to the same scale. The descriptors are designed to describe test tasks. More and more schools and teachers are using CFR levels to communicate with learners, and exam boards increasingly refer to them. Good practice guidelines are necessary for linking high-stakes assessment to the CFR. People think they know the CFR levels, associating them with levels that they already know. Okay. And number 8, there are official ways of linking tests to the CFR levels. So some of these statements are false. And that's your question here. How many statements are false? Which ones and why? I'll give you a little bit of time to think and consider. And I'm just going to randomly choose somebody. Mike. Mike, what do you think here?
Yeah, still working Mike. A couple of them out. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, I'm giving you more time. Sorry, this is I guess this is an important assessment consideration. You have to give students or whoever the people are involved time enough to complete the task.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right, Mike. How many are false?
I have 4 false and 2 question marks.
Oh, okay. That's good. Give me the numbers. Which ones are false?
1, 3, 4, 8.
Aha. Okay. Let's see how he did. Yep. 1 is false, and he mentioned this in the article. They've been validated before and after, and there's been a lot of validation work gone in with the descriptors. There's as some of you guys probably know, there's a huge amount of publishing and research that have been done related to the CFR. And he mentioned this in the article that people they do get interpreted consistently. Yeah, he says this is specifically not the function. That's not the function of CFR, is to get all test reporting to the same scale, and they're not. The descriptors are not designed to describe test tasks. That's not what they're doing. And Mike, yep, you got the last one also. There isn't. He says that at the end, there aren't official ways of linking tests to the CFR levels. Okay, and let me just quickly show you. He does mention that they produced a manual in 2009, and that helps. That provides some guidance, and you see the title here, relating language exams to the CFR. Okay, let me. Just, Mike, I'm going to come back to you in a second. We'll take a look at those, some questions, and we'll just take a break and see if anybody else has any questions also. Just something to show you. I found this while preparing actually for the slideshow, and it's this. You see the connection to the Lord of the Rings here? One framework to unite them all. And this is from a 2018 article in Language Assessment Quarterly, and they did some research in Europe about using the CFR in university entrance exams. And I just want to just show you a little bit of something that I found interesting from the abstract. And they say in the bottom here, the results of their research shows that the CFR is omnipresent at university entrance language tests, and B2 is the most common used level in that context. Okay. And the data also show that normative CFR use is common, that in many contexts, CFR levels are misused for marketing purposes or to control university admission. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay. And Mike, you had a couple of questions. I'm just going to dial it back a little bit here.
I guess number 2.
Yeah, so Mike, I'm going to get out of stop share here for a second. He mentions it just in the article, and I just took some sentences from the article, but he does mentions that the research, so they get interpreted language, yeah, the descriptors, they get interpreted consistently across different contexts, and also languages, different target languages also. I guess there's some consistency in terms of what makes an A2, what makes a B2. I don't know too much more about that, but is that what you were wondering about?
Well, I just thought that it would be more true if you put should in there, because we don't know who's doing what was the verb you used?
Interpret descriptors.
Interpret, right.
Yeah.
We don't know who's I didn't understand who you were referring to, who's interpreting them. So they should be interpreted consistently, but whether they are or not by all users is really an open question, right?
That's a good point, but I'm gonna deflect that. I'm gonna deflect that back to the author. That's what he writes. He actually writes that sentence there.
Okay.
That's what he does say. And what was the other one you were wondering about,
7.
Mike?
7
was people. Yeah, I realize this is it isn't. Sorry, I cut out part of it, and I realized I got a couple of shoulds here. People think they know the levels. I think the point is making like people think what they know, that they think they know what a B1 and a B2 is, but he's saying that without training and calibration, he said that people need to, because people think they know that the CFR levels, and it conflates to a lower intermediate or intermediate, these general levels that they have, right? So he makes the point that people think they know them, but they need to go back and take a look closer at them, especially if they're using them. So, Tom, before,
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Patty.
The article is based on interpretations in Europe. Is that correct?
Well, what that statement, that reference to that statement, I think so, possibly. I mean, it's connection, but it's the Europe in the Europe and the CFR. It's not the location. It's also, I mean, it's European languages, but they're using them for other places. But that's primarily, I guess, where the research is done. I think
okay.
so.
The reason I ask is because I don't think that, at least my sense of talking with people, is that American institutions, American language programs are not as cognizant or as well-versed, shall I say, as what we are understanding from the European. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, very much so. But also other parts of the world, and I'll bring in some other people here. Gabrielle, when I was down in, when I spent some time down in Colombia, and the teachers I'm talking with there are quite familiar with it. We had students come from Brazil that came up to our language program at the University of Arizona. And we had a student ask one of our teachers, the student said, so the student was put in level 5 or 6 or whatever it was. And she said to the teacher, is that a B1 or a B2? And the response was, this is America, we don't do that around here. So the teacher had no idea what it was. But so I'm finding, at least students and people who I interact with from South America, Gabrielle, in down there in Brazil, I mean, is the CFR, is it kind of known and used with teachers, with programs?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, but I was just writing down that question because that article put a lot of flea in my ear. In my school, we use the CFR as a reference, but we already had a matrix. We already had an assessment system. Yeah. And the question that I was writing down was, are we really interpreting the CFR correctly? Meaning, are our B1 students really B1? But it is very popular here too. But the question is, are we correlating them correctly, the levels, I mean, because our levels already existed and we adapted into, use the CFR because it's popular, because of the, we send students to other places around the world so they can get to the other school like, oh, I'm a B1.
I see.
You know?
So I was we can come back and revisit that question a bit later, Gabriel. But I was wondering how did it become popular? But I guess you've just kind of answered it, because students are traveling abroad or they're going places and they're seeing this scale coming up, so they're learning about it, and teachers also. Tom, just from your European perspective, I guess is it fair to assume that anybody teaching or working in the language industry in Europe is extremely well versed?
Yes,
in the CFR?
yeah, it's extremely. I mean, it's the Bible here, Eddie, and it has been for a really long time.
Yeah.
At our language school, we had pre-existing levels that, interestingly enough, because it's an American language school, were really very closely linked to the CEFR levels as well.
Yeah.
And so every language teacher in any teacher training program or any level from K through 12 through university, they're very, very aware and up to date and practical in terms of the CEFR. What's interesting in the 7 questions that you listed, I mean, it's interesting because many of them could have been false. There's a lot of confusion, I think, about when you really go deeper into what these levels mean. It's great for students and teachers to have a generic idea of someone's level and to give it a name. The reality is that you can have a student who is a B2 in some skills, an A2 in other skills, and really sort of cross the CEFR spectrum if you're talking about listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And that continues to be an issue in many, many language schools. What I think has been very popular is that it has found its way into the real world as well. So you'll see on people's curriculum vitae, their resumes, or on job descriptions and postings, they're saying that they need this particular level. And I think that is very positive, because in Europe, it's definitely raise the awareness level and I think the ambition level of students, not just in English, but in all languages, to get to a very, very functional C1, C2 level.
Yeah. It just taught me, just reminded me of an anecdote. I had a friend tell me we were doing we would do interviews for IELTS, but he was telling me about a test taker who came in, and before the test taker sat down, just looked at him and said, "Just to let you know, I'm a C1." And just getting that out there.
So we don't need to test.
But Tom, just going back, I mean, I guess the CFR, it's been around for about 20 years. I mean, is it? Would you say though that it's positively regarded and
yes,
it's well thought of, and
it's really considered the gold standard, and I mean, all textbooks now coming out of England and also the United States are benchmarked to the CEFR level. All language testing that is done, from the simplest tests from ITEP all the way to IELTS and TOEFL, all of the Cambridge, all of the Oxford exams, they're all linked very, very closely to CEFR. The last thing is, and I have to go in a few minutes, Eddie, but the comment about universities in Europe is really interesting, because in the last 3 to 4 years, hundreds of programs have sprung up in European universities in English. And the push is that, I think Germany has now 400 university programs in English. Italy has around 200. And to get into these programs, you need a B2. Many of these universities have their own in-house testing, so they're not using standardized tests as well. But the Common European Framework has been very, very important as English spreads to the university level, across the continent here.
I see. That's great and interesting to hear. Okay, good. Abdullah, welcome. Abdullah, you're in you're inside. I think you're in Saudi Arabia, yeah?
Oh, yes, I am.
What is the CFR's presence there? Is it used or known by language teachers, by programs?
Yeah, it's widespread here in Saudi. I mean, in public education, K through 12, and also at university level. I mean, the British Council has a big influence here in English language education here in Saudi since its establishment back in 1975. Right. So, I mean, of course, I mean, and like Tom said, everything is just, you know, the textbooks and the assessment tools, everything is just referenced and benchmarked against CEFR.
Yeah. Okay. Just reading Gabrielle's notes here. Okay, good. Okay, everybody, I'm just going to go back into screen share mode and show you a few more things, and then we can get back to some discussion in a few moments too. Okay. Okay, so moving on after my quiz, I showed you that manual there and that little bit of information. So here's just one other, and you can't see the guy's name here, but he mentions, this is from John Trim, a quote from him. It says, and he makes this point about what it can do. It's just, it's this central point of reference, right? And it's part of an interactive international system of cooperating institutions whose cumulative experience and expertise produces a solid structure of knowledge, understanding, and practice shared by all. So I guess that common understanding that we get from that I guess it's one of the primary uses of the CFR, and it just gives us a common language to talk about in terms of language proficiency. And I guess, I mean, if you're working in the language, I mean, if you're working in ESL and EFL, I think part of being assessment literate these days, I think, is at least having some degree of familiarity with the CFR, and it's important in language teaching and learning, and also in you know, particularly, I mean, things related to assessment also. We have, let me just keep going and we'll come back and see what questions you have. Here's a picture of where myself and Tani are. We're here at the University of Arizona in Tucson. So I would just want to tell you a little bit about how we use the CFR a little bit locally here. So we work at the University of Arizona. Here's a picture of the English Center, where we've been working to for a few years now. And so we've been using the CFR both at the university and also at the English Center. And I'll just briefly tell you a little bit about what we do. So at CECL, at the English Center, we've used the CFR as in terms of IEP structure and levels. We've used it for placement testing, and also we've been using it for proficiency testing at the university. And I can just tell you a little bit of about what we do with those things. Here's a placement table that we had on our website, I guess a few years ago. I don't think it's there now, but anyway, it's a little bit complicated. But when we were placing students, and we had 9 levels, you see the different 9 levels here, and then we had the CFR, how they correlated to the CFR. Okay, and I remember doing teacher training about this, and again, just these different levels. This was at that time, and you know, with a bigger student cohort that doesn't exist now. But I remember doing teacher training about it, and explain to people this, just the need to define our proficiency levels both internally and externally. And I said that the CFR should serve as a reference point and an anchor for programs and language courses. And CFR alignment should help decision making for CECL programs like learning outcomes, textbook selections, etc. So I guess when I was assessment coordinator there, I was advocating for you know, for lots of use of the CFR and alignment to it. And we also use it for we did a speaking test for all new students that are coming in. And we had students that we had two teachers involved with interviews at that time, and an interviewer and somebody who was a rater. Okay, and we were using the CFR scoring to help score our students for placement. So again, you have the global scale, and we gave teachers, this was the scale that we were using, and it's based, it's again, you can see it on the top here, but it was CFR based, and we asked teachers to give students a score based on, and literally these were the CFR descriptors, okay? And yeah, the assessment criteria, we were doing teacher training, we were training teachers. These are the things that you need to be looking for, okay? Range, accuracy, and fluency. And that screenshot isn't very good, but literally this is from the CFR, these descriptions of range, accuracy, and fluency when we were asking our teachers to score students in terms of their oral proficiency, and just a record that they were using, and just rater guidelines. So this, again, this is a little bit from some of my teacher training from a few years ago, telling teachers to be familiar with the proficiency rubric, which was CFR, assessing communicative competence, students' ability to use the language correctly, pay attention to accuracy, and we told them, generally speaking, scores should be in the 1 to 4 range in our scale. So basically A1 to B2. And those are the students that you see in all, I guess, most IEPs and programs, because once students get beyond B2, typically that's a proficiency level that's good enough to get them into the university. Okay, so just a little bit about what we were doing about IEP structures and levels. We also have been using the CFR for English proficiency testing at the university, and Tani and I have been involved in developing and using we call it the CEPT. It's just an academic proficiency test that we use, and this is from our University of Arizona admissions website. And in 2018, this is important. I wanted to make sure I mentioned it somewhere along the way. In 2018, CFR, the good people at the Council of Europe, I mean, they put out a companion volume with all new descriptors. Again, this is a couple of 100 pages, but it's a great, not only a great reference, but a great, it has lots of practical tools and rubrics also. So we've been using it, and we use it to update the report that we send to students. We use it for our writing rubrics. We also use it for a speaking rubric. And I think I can show you, yeah. So I mean, this is a rubric that we use for assessing speaking, and this comes directly from that 2018 that CFR publication. And this is part of the rubric that we use for writing and different proficiency levels, and these are all CFR based. And even for our students who take the test, and you see on the top, these are the CFR proficiency levels, and even we use the scale here. That's part of our score report. Okay, so we've been using the CFR quite a bit, I think, to some degree, in the English programs at the English Center, and also for the proficiency testing that we've been doing for the university as well. Okay, so just getting back into a bit of a group discussion. I'll see if you have any questions about what I showed you, but I'm interested in these questions. How do you use the CFR in your context? How could or would you like to use it in the future? And what questions do you have about the CFR and its use in assessment, either at programs or at the classroom level, or also in even for large scale proficiency testing? So any questions, first of all, just about how we've been using the CFR at the English Center or at the university? I think, at least for me, and maybe I'll ask Tani to chime in as well, but I particularly, I mean, personally, I find it's just a very useful tool and scale, and there's lots of different things that you can do with it, and it just provides that guideline and scale that's internationally recognized, and I think it helped us with our decision making and the things that we were doing. Tani, any thoughts or anything you could add?
Yeah, I think it may be interesting to bring this up here. When I was doing training for other teachers to do our interviews, one of the things, they watched an interview and the test taker was very proficient, right? Was at a C2 level of proficiency. But both teachers told me that they would not give them a C2 level of proficiency because they were thinking of me as a non-native speaker. So they were basing the test taker's ability and looking at my proficiency in English and thought that I was a C2, and another teacher who was also non-native speaker of English, and they were thinking that he was a C2. And then in the companion, in the 2018 companion, it says that A1 to C2 are the levels that can be taught in a classroom.
Yeah.
After that are levels that, of course, non-native speakers can achieve, but it's after you've learned in the classroom or if you achieved that level. So comparing that test taker to my proficiency in English and to this other teacher who was also a non-native speaker of English, but is very fluent, to a C2 level was not correct. And therefore, they were not giving the test taker a C2 when the test taker was in fact a C2 level of proficiency, right? So I think it was a good discussion to have with regards to the 6 levels. The 6 levels are not limited, like they're not only 6 levels.
That's a good point to make it. Yeah. And I remember reading that, Tani, and it's in that companion guideline that you get people that are beyond C2, I guess, and we're talking about people who are professional translators and interpreters, and even higher than that. But Tani, that's also interesting. You're talking about doing the teacher training with those teachers, and a good example of, I mean, we bring our biases into assessment, and I think that's part of good assessment literacy too, is that we try to minimize our biases as much as possible. What about everybody else? What is your experience with the CFR? And even if you haven't used it much, what are you seeing any things that you think, oh, this is something that we could use? Eric, if I can ask you there at Virginia Tech, I mean, in your program, your experience there, and do you have much use of the CFR there?
Sure, definitely, in a lot of the same ways as you have at the Cecil. My colleague actually is here too, Pinar Gardel down in the corner, I think there, so has joined us. Also.
Hi, Pinar. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
And and one thing actually Tani just mentioned, I was not aware of that we consider levels beyond C2, and I also have used the scale, or I've used the CEFR for all the different ways we can pronounce that, I guess.
No, that's fine, Eric. Yeah.
I've used that also for J1 visitors to the university to assess them. And I had one complaint from a partner university we had in France who were sending students over, and I kept scoring this group as C2, and the director there said, I don't think all these people are at a C2 level, but I was confident that they were, and I don't think she was aware, as actually I wasn't either, really, that that there may be a beyond that level. It could be a very wide range then, that somebody, because to me they were certainly C2 as far as the descriptors went. So that's interesting to know.
And Tom makes a good point earlier too, because sometimes, as we know too, you get that you can get students are demonstrating different levels of ability in different skills, right? In different skill areas, and sometimes you can be B2 in one skill and an A1 or A2 in another. Yeah.
Eddie, I actually wanted to make a comment related to that and what Tom said and what Gabriel said with adapting the levels to the CEFR. And this is something that I've been thinking a lot about with our placement test here at Cecil, because we have the levels described as they align with the CEFR. However, at the levels, we have learning outcomes that are asking students to do, like academic related learning outcomes that are asking students to do more that is actually described in the CEFR, because in the CEFR, you don't see the can-do statements as much as it relates to academic work. And that's what we're asking students to do in their level. So we're asking a B1 student to write an essay, like fully developed and everything. And so this is something that I think like it's been on my mind a lot lately, and I wanted to hear about what other people think about that, because they are at the level of proficiency described on the CEFR, but we're asking with our learning outcomes for them to do more than what their language level would allow them to, if that makes sense.
So Tanya, you're talking about a misalignment between
with the learning outcomes,
yeah.
Exactly, especially academic learning outcomes.
Yeah, and anybody else who just using can-do statements from the CFR and with learning outcomes? Anybody?
Well, I just wanted to actually ask a question. Going back to what you were talking about in Arizona is the examples you showed in the beginning were all using the CEFR for placement, but are you actually aligning course outcomes to CEFR descriptors as well?
At that time, I think that was an ambition, and this is, I guess, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I was pushing for closer alignment, I think, and it didn't happen. So I guess I lost that dogfight. So
and that's what I'm worried about, because the learning outcomes are higher than what they were supposed to have in terms of the language proficiency. So if you have a B1 student with what they're able to do with the language and what we're asking them to do in terms of academic learning outcomes, it's not aligned.
Right.
And Mike, we had I mean, there was, I certainly remember some resistance to aligning things with the CFR, and at that time, I mean, you know, sometimes we had up to, you know, we have 30 or 35 teachers or something, and there was some, yeah, there was some resistance about how strongly we wanted to get wedded to the CFR. Yeah. Anybody else? Just, I mean, do you try to make connections between your learning outcomes in your programs and the framework?
I think it's a great idea, but in my institution, not yet. I've also tried to introduce that, but again, same thing, a lot of resistance, because there's a feeling that it would mean sort of upending all the levels that we already know. So I think there's just the kind of resistance to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Just one other thing that occurs to me, one of the other testing companies, I think it's Pearson. They put out they're also a version of, I forget, they had a global scale, but I remember going to one of their trainings, and what they were saying was that I guess one of their criticisms, I don't know if it's a general one, is that the CFR and the descriptors, they didn't have much reference to, for example, grammatical levels or other things. And I think, if I remember that, they were focused on particularly on speaking and writing maybe. And there was some perception that its connections to some of the other skills that were limited. So that was at least, you know, how they tried to promote their scale also. So Tom is sorry, but yeah, go ahead, Mike.
No, I think part of the reason for that is, well, two reasons. One is that these descriptors are actually descriptors of levels of language use, not language learning. So we're really describing language users. We're not describing language learners. And the other thing is that it's a communicative syllabus, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's right. That grammar is, you know, grammar isn't the prioritized in the CEFR because it's very communicative in its approach.
Right, but accuracy certainly is in terms of the accuracy of what students are producing, the language production. Right. So it's there, but in a more subtle form, I guess, maybe.
But there are no, I mean, it's been a long time since I've actually looked. I have the document. I got it in, I think, 2004. So it's been a while since I've looked at it, but I don't think there's actually a section where there's an explicit description of grammar, you know, like aspects, features of grammar, like tense use or clause use. I don't think it goes into that, does it?
No.
As I remember, it doesn't. It doesn't.
No. Okay. All right. What else, everybody? I mean, just completely open. Any things that you joined and thought that you wanted to hear about or talk about that we haven't discussed so far?
Eddie, just a quick comment. We have found, and I think a lot of language programs have found here, that it has served the purpose of creating a real desire to have all of the skills level out equally. In other words, we see a lot of students who obviously will be higher, a B1, a B2 at the listening and speaking, and not as strong in reading and writing. And what we have found is that, you know, when we let them know that, and when we're tutoring them or advising them on which courses to take, they're very, very interested in bringing the skills that are lagging behind up to their highest skill level.
Yeah.
And we found that to be very, very positive. And you know, it used to be that we would suggest that personally as language professionals or language teachers, but having the CEFR to kind of back that up or support that, we have found to be very, very helpful. And since many of the students that we see end up taking IELTS and TOEFL and ITEP as well for academic purposes or matriculation to universities, and those tests definitely, you know, quantify all of the skill areas and will specify very, very clearly that no skill area should be below a certain score. Yeah. We found that CEFR has helped us to kind of raise the level of all of the skills.
Yeah, that's great, Tom. And it just reminded me also that it just of the what I guess the different things that come with the framework, and also that long list of or just that the self-assessment functions that students can do. Because if you look at some of the documents and rubrics and things that are produced, one of them is just self-assessment documents for students, and literally like, can you do these things? And it's almost like either their checklists or whatever that are at A1 or A2, and it's just asking students, are you able to do these things? And I've seen some of those. I haven't made use of them, but I thought that's great also. So, you know, just something else, another element of the CFR that, you know, is helpful and useful for students. My colleagues here in the US, do you think that the CFR will be more widespread and used in the United States and programs here?
I believe it will. I think, as you just mentioned, also some of our instructors and I've personally, you know, kind of pushed that, looking for those can do statements for students to sort of self-assess themselves at our different levels and saying, hey, can you do this right now? And if you can't, then that's something we're going to work on. I think it has worked, just as Tom was speaking about, to get people more to kind of level up with, we have a lot of Chinese students and Saudi students, like a lot of ESL programs, and sometimes we have quite a difference in levels, you know, in different skill areas with those students. So I think that's definitely worked to get them to understand that they may be lacking, for example, in one area or another.
Yeah. Okay.
I work with people who primarily do assessment or do the paperwork for J Scholars. And I'll be honest, I don't think many of them are very cognizant of all the CEFR areas. You know, if you're an admissions director, yes, but if you're somebody who's a VP or you're in general a person working with, I don't think they've taken the time to learn about it. They're very much revert back to the IELTS, the TOEFL, and ITEP to be the focus of their admission or their language proficiency documentation for the State Department. So I think there's a lot that's still out there that needs to be so I brought to their attention, shall I say.
It's a good point, Patty. And you know that, I mean, sometimes, I mean, at universities, a lot of the people that are left making the decisions sometimes in terms of admissions is administrators. I mean, at different, if you're talking about different departments or colleges, sometimes it's like someone working in an administrative office say, okay, what's the cut score I need to enter students? And sometimes, I mean, I've talked to people, they're admittedly lost. Eddie, I have no idea what, you know, I haven't done anything like this before. So
you're exactly correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think perhaps the more widespread the CFR is used in the industry, I think the better for everybody. Okay, I'm going back into screen share mode here for just a minute or so, everybody, just to wrap up some things and let you know about what I want to let you know about. Just a second here. Yeah, so just again, we're still focused on this bigger goal of promoting assessment literacy. And so what's coming up? This is the last webinar for this year, and what's happening in next year is Tani is going to be taking over the webinars for the new year, and we already have a schedule up on our webpage. So there's some interesting things going on. So I hope you can come back and join some of those. And just thanks to everybody for coming and joining. Some of you guys have been regulars. So by the way, if you've been a regular and want a certificate, please touch base and let me know, and I can arrange that. But thanks for joining us, and thanks for ITAP also for sponsoring the webinar this month. And it's been for me, it's been